The room went quiet the second my radio crackled to life. Not the polite kind of quiet you get when someone drops a glass or misses a step. This was sharper, heavier. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. Laughter died in people's throats. Even the old ceiling fan seemed to hesitate, its slow rotation suddenly too loud in the silence. "Red alert! Commanding Officer Mitchell, report immediately." 70 pairs of eyes turned toward me. My father was still holding his drink, frozen halfway to his lips. And for the first time in my life, he didn't look like the strongest man in the room. He looked confused. 3 minutes earlier, I had been exactly where I always was in that house, standing slightly off to the side, close enough to be included, far enough to be overlooked. The Mitchell family gathering happened every year, whether anyone wanted it or not. My father insisted, said it kept tradition alive. What it really kept alive was hierarchy, an invisible ranking system built on old war stories, promotions, and who had earned their place the hard way. Tonight the house was packed. Former Marines, Army buddies, neighbors who'd known us for decades, cousins who only showed up for free food and stories they didn't understand. The air smelled like grilled meat, cheap bourbon, and something else, something sharper. Expectation, maybe. Judgment. I stood near the edge of the living room, fingers wrapped around a glass of iced tea that had long since gone warm. I hadn't taken a sip in 15 minutes. "Sarah." My father's voice cut across the room like it always did, firm, controlled, impossible to ignore. He stood near the fireplace, flanked by 2 men I recognized from old photographs. Both had that same posture, straight backs, squared shoulders, the kind of presence that never quite leaves even after the uniform does. "Come here," he said, motioning me over. I walked toward him, steady, measured. Years of training had taught me how to move without hesitation, without giving anything away. But this wasn't a briefing room or a command center. This was home, or something that used to be. "This is my daughter," my father said to the group, one hand gesturing toward me. "Sarah!" One of the men nodded politely. The other gave me a brief, assessing glance. "What branch?" he asked. "Army," I replied. "What do you do?" I opened my mouth to answer. "She works in administration," my father cut in smoothly before I could say a word. "Paperwork, logistics, that kind of thing." There it was. The label. The one he'd been using for years. A small ripple of understanding moved through the group, subtle nods, faint smiles, the kind people give when they think they've figured you out. "Ah," one of them said, "keeps the machine running." "At least it's safe," another added. "Nothing wrong with that." My father chuckled softly, taking a sip of his drink. "Yeah. She's never been anywhere near the front lines." The words landed harder than they should have. Not because they were entirely false, but because of how easily he said them, how confidently, as if he knew the full scope of my life, as if he'd ever asked. A cousin standing nearby leaned closer to her friend and whispered just loud enough for me to hear, "I always thought she'd do something more intense." "Not everyone's cut out for that," her friend replied. I felt the familiar pressure build behind my ribs, tight, controlled, contained. The same feeling I used to get years ago when I still tried to explain, when I still believed that if I said the right words in the right way, they would finally understand. They never did. So I stopped trying. "I like what I do," I said quietly. My father gave a dismissive wave of his hand. "Of course you do. It's steady, predictable. Nothing wrong with that." Nothing wrong with that? Except in his world there was. In his world, worth was measured in deployment scars, in stories told over drinks, in how close you'd come to something that could have killed you. Paperwork didn't count, strategy didn't count, command didn't count unless it came with dirt under your boots and a rifle in your hands. And me? I didn't fit that picture. "Hey," one of the older men said, shifting his weight, "at least she's serving. That's more than most people can say." "That's true," my father agreed. "I just figured she'd push herself a little more, you know." There was no malice in his tone. That was the worst part. He meant it. I glanced around the room. People were watching, not openly, not aggressively, but enough. Enough to see how I'd respond. Enough to measure me against the version of myself they'd already accepted. I didn't give them anything. I took a slow breath, letting it out evenly, grounding myself the way I had 1,000 times before. Before operations, before decisions that carried weight, most of them would never understand. Because explaining wouldn't change anything. It never had. "Someone's got to handle the details," I said, my voice calm, almost neutral. Sure, my father said, but that's not where the real pressure is. I almost smiled at that. Almost. The real pressure? If only he knew. A burst of laughter from the kitchen pulled attention away for a moment, and the conversation shifted. Stories of deployments, old missions, names I recognized but had never met. The kind of shared history that bonded people in ways I respected even if I wasn't included in it. I stepped back slightly, reclaiming my space near the edge of the room. The ice in my glass had completely melted now. I set it down on the nearest table. That's when I felt it. The faint vibration against my shoulder. Subtle at first, easy to ignore if you weren't paying attention. But I always paid attention. My radio. I stilled. No one else seemed to notice. Conversations continued. Glasses clinked. Someone turned up the volume on the music. Then it came again, stronger this time. A sharp crackle. My hand moved instinctively, fingers brushing the device clipped just beneath my jacket. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I didn't know what it meant, but because I knew exactly what it meant. And once I answered it, everything would change. I pressed the button. Static filled the air for a brief moment, just long enough for my pulse to settle into that familiar, focused rhythm. Then the voice came through, clear and unmistakable. Red alert, Commanding Officer Mitchell, report immediately. The words cut clean through the room. Not loud, but sharp enough to slice through every conversation at once. Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that makes people look at each other first, then at you. I felt it before I saw it, the shift in attention, the weight of dozens of gazes turning in my direction. Slowly, I lowered my hand from the radio. My father was staring at me now. Not dismissive. Not amused. Just staring. Probably not you, he said after a beat, a small, uncertain laugh slipping into his voice. Must be someone else. No one else laughed. The radio crackled again. Commanding Officer Mitchell, confirm receipt. This is not a drill. This time there was no ambiguity. No room for interpretation. My name. My rank. My responsibility. I lifted my gaze and met my father's eyes. For a moment neither of us said anything. Then I spoke. I have to go. For a moment no one moved. It was as if the room hadn't quite caught up to what had just happened. As if the words were still hanging in the air, waiting to be processed, translated into something that made sense. My father blinked once, then shook his head slightly like he was trying to clear it. That doesn't sound right, he said, his voice lower, now more cautious. Commanding Officer. Someone near the back let out a quiet laugh, the kind people use when they're unsure whether something is serious or not. Maybe it's a training thing another man offered. They've got all kinds of titles these days. Yeah, my father added quickly, seizing onto that explanation. Probably just internal jargon. Doesn't mean what it sounds like. I didn't correct him. I'd spent years not correcting him. The radio in my hand was still warm from where my fingers had pressed against it. I could feel the faint hum of it like a heartbeat, steady, insistent, impossible to ignore. Commanding Officer Mitchell, respond. The voice came again, sharper this time. We are escalating to full response protocol. Full response protocol. That wasn't language you misheard. A few people shifted uncomfortably. The energy in the room had changed, subtle but unmistakable. Curiosity had replaced amusement. The easy assumptions were starting to crack just a little. My father looked at me again, more closely this time. Sarah, what is that? I met his gaze. There were a dozen things I could have said. Explanations, clarifications, details he'd never asked for before. I chose none of them. I need to step out, I said, my voice even. Now. He frowned. Step out for what you're in the middle of. My phone rang. The screen lit up with a number I didn't need to read twice. Direct line, command priority. I answered immediately, turning slightly away from the crowd without actually leaving it. Mitchell. Ma'am, the voice on the other end said, tight, controlled, urgent. We have a situation. Red level escalation confirmed. You're the only commanding officer within operational radius with full clearance. I could feel the room behind me going quieter even though no one was supposed to be listening. Give me the overview, I said. Potential breach of secure communications network. Possible external interference. We've initiated containment, but we need authorization to proceed with countermeasures. My mind shifted gears instantly. The house, the people, the conversation, all of it faded to the background, replaced by something sharper, more precise. How long has the breach been active? 8 minutes. We've isolated 2 points of entry, but we can't confirm full containment without your authorization. 8 minutes was too long. Any indication of origin? Preliminary data suggests foreign intrusion, but we're still verifying. I glanced at my watch out of habit, already calculating timelines, response windows, escalation thresholds. Lock down all non-essential channels, I ordered. Maintain internal communications only. No external transmission until I review the data personally. Yes, ma'am. I'm en route. 10 minutes. Understood. We'll have the command center ready. I ended the call. When I turned back around, the entire room was watching me. Not casually. Not politely. Fully. My father's expression had changed. The certainty was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, something closer to uncertainty. Who was that, he asked. Work, I said simply. That didn't sound like paperwork, someone muttered under their breath. I ignored it. My father took a step closer. Sarah, what's going on? There it was. The question he'd never really asked before. Not like this. Not when the answer might matter. I have a situation I need to handle, I said. I don't have time to explain it right now. That's not an explanation, he said, frustration creeping back into his voice. You can't just... The radio crackled again, louder this time, cutting him off mid-sentence. Commanding Officer Mitchell, we are at critical threshold, awaiting your direct command. Critical threshold. The words landed like a weight. I didn't look at anyone else. I didn't need to. Copy that, I said into the radio. Maintain position. I'm on my way. Confirmed. I clipped the radio back into place and reached for my jacket. Sarah, my father said again, more sharply now, you're not making any sense. Since when are you... I paused just long enough to look at him. Really look at him. At the man who had taught me discipline, resilience, strength, and somehow still never learned how to see me. I'll explain later, I said. You keep saying that he snapped. But right now it sounds like you're pretending to be something you're not. The words hung between us. For a second the room felt smaller. Tighter. Like everything had narrowed down to this one moment. I could have argued. I could have corrected him, laid everything out, forced him to see the truth he'd spent years ignoring. But there was no time. And more importantly, there was no need. Because this wasn't the moment for words. It was the moment for action. I'm not pretending, I said quietly. Then I turned and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard someone whisper, "What just happened?" I don't know, another voice replied, but that didn't sound like a desk job. I stepped outside into the night air, the door closing behind me with a soft click. The shift was immediate. The noise of the party disappeared, replaced by something cleaner, cooler. The faint hum of distant traffic, the rustle of wind through trees, the steady rhythm of my own breathing. I moved quickly down the driveway, pulling my keys from my pocket. My phone buzzed again, another incoming call. I answered it as I reached my car. Mitchell. Ma'am, this is Lieutenant Harris, the voice said. We've identified a third intrusion point. It's more sophisticated than the others. We think they're testing our response time. Or mapping our system, I said, sliding into the driver's seat. That's our concern. Then we assume worst-case scenario, I replied. Prepare for full defensive posture. I want all access points monitored in real time. Yes, ma'am. I started the engine. How's the team holding? Waiting for you, he said. No one's making a move without your call. Good. That meant discipline. That meant control. I'll be there in 9 minutes, I said. Keep everything contained until then. Understood. I hung up and pulled out onto the road. The drive blurred into a series of calculated movements, turns, taken a little sharper than usual. Traffic lights judged not by color but by timing distance measured in seconds instead of miles. My father's voice echoed faintly in the back of my mind. She just does paperwork. I exhaled slowly, steadying myself. That version of me, the one he believed in, was easy. Safe. Predictable. But it had never been real. Streetlights flashed across the windshield in steady intervals, each one marking the distance between who I was and who they thought I was. My radio crackled again. Commanding Officer Mitchell, status update. En route, I said. ETA 8 minutes. Copy that. All units are standing by. All units. Waiting. For me. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, focus sharpening to a single point. The house, the voices, the assumptions, they were gone now. There was only the mission, only the responsibility, only the truth I'd never needed to explain. Behind me, miles away, my family was still trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. And for the first time, they couldn't. The gate opened before I even came to a full stop. 2 armed guards were already moving, one stepping forward to verify the other, signaling the control booth. The overhead lights snapped brighter, washing the entry point in a sterile white glow that erased shadows and doubt alike. I rolled down my window, handing over my credentials without a word. The guard glanced at them, then at me, then straightened instantly. "Yes, ma'am." No hesitation, no second look. The barrier lifted. Inside, everything moved faster. The base at night had its own rhythm, controlled, deliberate, every motion tied to protocol. But tonight, there was an edge to it. A tightening. Personnel moved with sharper purpose. Conversations cut short, footsteps quicker, more direct. Red Alert did that. It stripped everything down to essentials. I parked in the reserved command section and stepped out, already removing my jacket as I walked. The cool air hit my skin, grounding me, pulling me fully into the present. A soldier at the entrance snapped to attention as I approached. "Commanding Officer Mitchell." "Status," I said, not breaking stride. "Lieutenant Harris is waiting inside, ma'am. All teams are in position." I nodded once and pushed through the doors. The command center was alive. Screens lined the walls, rows of data streams, network maps, system diagnostics, flickering in constant motion. Voices overlapped in controlled bursts, each one precise, clipped, purposeful. No panic, just pressure. And in the middle of it all, "Ma'am?" Lieutenant Harris stepped forward, relief flashing across his face before discipline snapped it back into place. He handed me a tablet already loaded with data. "We've confirmed 3 intrusion points," he said. 2 are contained, the 3rd is adapting. I scanned the information as I walked toward the central console. Adapting how? It's probing different entry vectors. Every time we isolate one path, it shifts. I stopped at the main display. A live schematic of the communications network filled the screen nodes, pathways, security layers, and there it was. A flicker. Small, but wrong. "They're not just testing response time," I said quietly. "They're learning our pattern." Harris nodded. "That's what we were afraid of. How long before they map enough to bypass containment?" He hesitated. "At this rate, 20 minutes, maybe less." Too fast. I set the tablet down and stepped closer to the console, my mind already reorganizing the situation. "Who authorized the current containment structure?" I asked. "Captain Lewis, ma'am, following standard protocol." Standard protocol wasn't built for something that learned this quickly. "Pull him up." Seconds later, Captain Lewis appeared on one of the side screens. "Ma'am." "Walk me through your containment logic," I said. He did quick, efficient, technically sound. "And not enough." "They're using our own response timing against us," I said when he finished. "Every adjustment you make is giving them more data." "So what's the alternative?" he asked. I didn't answer immediately. Because the alternative wasn't safe. It wasn't standard. But it was necessary. "We stop reacting," I said finally. "We force them into a controlled path." Harris frowned slightly. "You want to guide the intrusion?" "I want to trap it," I corrected. "Right now they have freedom of movement. We take that away." I reached for the console, pulling up a deeper layer of the system architecture, one most people in the room didn't even have clearance to access. If we reroute internal traffic through a single channel, I continued, we can isolate their access point and cut them off completely. "That'll expose part of the network," Harris said. "Only temporarily," I replied. "And only if we do it wrong." I started issuing orders, my voice steady, precise. "Team Alpha, redirect non-essential communications to secondary buffer. Team Beta, initiate silent trace on the 3rd intrusion point. No active engagement yet." "Yes, ma'am." "Captain Lewis," I said, turning slightly toward the screen. "I want a false pathway set up, something that looks like a vulnerability but isn't." He blinked once, a decoy. "A controlled one," I said. "Make it believable, make it tempting." Understanding dawned in his expression. "Yes, ma'am." The room shifted. Not in chaos, but in alignment. Everyone moved with clearer purpose, now each action tied to a larger strategy instead of isolated reactions. I watched the main screen as the changes took effect. The network map adjusted pathways, narrowing traffic, consolidating the system, tightening like a net. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, "There," Harris said. The flicker changed direction. Not random anymore. Guided. "They took the bait," he added. "Of course they did." "They think they found a weakness," I said. I leaned slightly closer to the screen, tracking the movement. "Let them go deeper," Ma'am Harris asked. "They won't commit unless they believe it's real," I said. "We give them just enough." Seconds stretched. The room held its breath, not literally, but close enough. Every eye was on the screen. Every movement mattered. "Therein," one of the analysts said. Trace locked, another added. "Wait," I said. The word came out softer than the rest, but it carried more weight. We needed certainty, not assumption. The flicker moved again. Deeper. Slower now. Careful. "They're mapping the decoy structure," Harris said. "Good," I replied. "That means they're invested." Another second. Another shift. "Now," I said. "Execute containment." The command center moved as one. Keys struck, systems engaged, pathways sealed. On the main screen, the flicker stopped. Then disappeared. Connection severed, the analyst confirmed. Intrusion contained. Silence followed. Not confusion this time. Completion. Harris let out a breath he'd been holding. "We got them." I straightened, stepping back from the console. "For now," I said, "run a full diagnostic sweep. I want confirmation there are no secondary breaches." "Yes, ma'am." "Maintain elevated alert status for the next 2 hours," I added. "No one assumes this is over until we verify it." The room responded instantly, "Yes, ma'am." I stepped away from the central display, the tension in my shoulders easing just slightly. Not gone. Just managed. Harris moved to stand beside me. "We wouldn't have caught that without you." "That's not the point," I said. "It kind of is," he replied. I didn't respond. Because it wasn't about recognition. It never had been. It was about responsibility. About making the call when no one else could. I glanced at the clock. 32 minutes. From the first alert to full containment. Fast. But not fast enough to be comfortable. "We'll review everything in the morning," I said. "I want a full report on how they adapted." "Yes, ma'am." I nodded once and turned toward the exit. Ma'am Harris called after me. I paused. "Sir," he corrected himself quickly, then shook his head. I raised a hand, slightly stopping him. "It's fine," I said. He hesitated, then added, "They asked for you specifically." I looked at him. "Before you got here," he clarified, "they didn't just hit the system. They requested access through your clearance channel." That made me still. Not visibly, but enough. "They knew your name," he finished. I held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. "Make sure that's included in the report." "Yes, ma'am." I left the command center without another word. The hallway outside was quieter, the noise of the operation fading behind me. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't need to check it to know who it was. I pulled it out anyway. 43 missed calls. My father's name at the top. Followed by messages. Short, uncertain. "Sarah, call me." What is going on? "They're saying your name." I stared at the screen for a second longer than I should have. Then I locked it and slipped it back into my pocket. Outside, the night air felt different. Clearer. Colder. Or maybe that was just me. Back at the house, they were still trying to understand. Still trying to fit what they'd seen into the version of me they'd already decided on. Here, there was no confusion. No assumptions. Just reality. Rank. Responsibility. And the weight that came with both. I walked toward my car, the base lights stretching long shadows across the pavement. Behind me, the command center continued to operate controlled alert, ready. Ahead of me, something else was waiting. By the time I pulled out of the base, the story had already outrun me. I didn't know exactly how it happened, whether it was an internal briefing that reached the wrong ears, a routine report flagged higher than expected, or someone on the outside who had been watching more closely than we realized, but somewhere between containment and confirmation, my name had crossed a line. It wasn't supposed to cross. And once it did, there was no pulling it back. My phone buzzed again. And again. I ignored it for the first 5 minutes of the drive. then 10. By the 15th, the vibration had become a constant presence, like the echo of something I couldn't quite outrun. At a red light, I finally picked it up. 58 missed calls. I scrolled. Dad. 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 Unknown numbers. Cousins. Aunt Lisa. More unknown numbers. Then a text sitting at the top of the list like it had been waiting. Sarah, are you on the news? I stared at it for a moment. Then another message came in. Turn on Channel 7, now. The light turned green. I drove. Back at the house, the shift had started small. At first, it was just confusion. The kind that settles in after something doesn't quite make sense, but no one wants to be the first to admit it. She said commanding officer one of the men had muttered, staring at the door long after I'd left. Probably internal terminology, my father replied too quickly. They've got all kinds of roles now. Yeah, someone else added, doesn't mean she's actually in charge. That explanation held for about 2 minutes. Then my father's phone rang. He answered it with the casual confidence of someone who expected an ordinary conversation. Hey. He stopped. His expression changed. Not dramatically, but enough. What he said frowning, no, that's not. He turned slightly away from the group, lowering his voice. Where did you hear that? The room quieted again. People pretended not to listen. No one succeeded. Yeah, she just left, he continued. Something about work. A pause. Longer this time. My father's shoulders shifted just slightly, but enough to break the rigid line he usually carried. That's not possible, he said finally. Another pause. His grip tightened around the phone. Okay, he said. Okay, I'll check. He hung up. What was that, someone asked? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked toward the TV, picked up the remote, turned it on. Static. Then a local news channel. Breaking update on a developing security situation, the anchor was saying, her tone measured but urgent. Sources confirmed that a coordinated attempt to breach a protected communications network was successfully contained earlier tonight. My father's jaw tightened. That's naughty started. Then the screen changed. A still image appeared. Professional. Formal. Clear. My face. Not from tonight. From a briefing months ago. Uniform pressed. Expression steady. Underneath it, a line of text. Commanding Officer Sarah Mitchell. The room went completely still. We are being told, the anchor continued, that Commanding Officer Mitchell, who was already in the region at the time of the incident, personally directed the response that prevented further escalation. Someone dropped a glass. No one reacted. They're saying she was the only officer on site with the necessary clearance and authority to initiate containment protocols, the anchor added. My father didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't breathe, at least not visibly. That can't be right, Aunt Lisa whispered. Maybe it's someone else with the same name, another voice offered weakly. But even as they said it, they knew. The image was still on the screen. Unmistakable. This is Commanding Officer Sarah Mitchell, the anchor repeated. According to official sources, she has been operating in a leadership capacity within her unit for several years. Several years. The words landed like a delayed explosion. Several years. Not weeks. Not months. Years. My father's hand tightened around the remote. Turn it up, someone said quietly. He didn't respond. Turn it up, they repeated. He pressed the button. Mitchell's role has largely remained out of the public eye due to the sensitive nature of her assignments, the anchor continued. However, internal reports describe her as a key decision-maker in high-level operations, requiring advanced clearance. A low murmur spread through the room. Confusion. Shock. Something else, too. Regret, maybe. She told us she worked in administration, one of the men said slowly. No, my father said, his voice barely above a whisper. She didn't. They all looked at him. He swallowed. We told ourselves that, he added. Silence followed. Heavy. Unavoidable. The pieces were starting to shift now, memories rearranging themselves under new light. Every time I'd tried to speak. Every time I'd been cut off. Every time they'd filled in the blanks without asking. My father's phone buzzed again. He didn't look at it. Didn't need to. He already knew what it would say. Around him, conversations started in fragments. Wait, so when she said, "Commanding officer" means that call. She wasn't. The sentences never finished. They didn't have to, because the truth had already arrived, and it hadn't come from me. I pulled into my apartment complex just after midnight. The parking lot was quiet, the building lights dimmed to their usual late-hour glow. Everything looked exactly the same as it had that morning, which felt strange, because nothing else was. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, hands resting loosely on the steering wheel. My phone buzzed again. I picked it up this time. Dad. I stared at the name. Then I answered. Sarah. His voice wasn't what I expected. It wasn't firm. It wasn't certain. It wasn't even angry. It was unsteady. Are you a commanding officer?" he asked. Straight to it. No build-up. No assumptions. Just the question. Yes, I said. Silence. Longer than any we'd shared before. But you said you worked in administration, he said finally. I do, I replied. Administration is part of my job. That's not what that looked like, he said. No, I agreed, it's not. Another pause. I could hear him breathing now, slower, heavier, like he was trying to process something that didn't fit. How long, he asked. 3 years in command, I said. Longer in the unit. Another silence. Different this time. Not confusion. Realization. Why didn't you tell me, he asked? I leaned back in my seat, looking up at the dark outline of the building. I did, I said quietly. He didn't respond. You just didn't hear me. The line went still. No denial. No argument. Because somewhere deep down he knew. He remembered. Not the details. But the pattern, the interruptions, the dismissals. The way he'd already decided who I was before I finished speaking. Sarah, he started. I closed my eyes for a second. I just got back, I said. I'm tired. Wait, he said quickly. We need to talk about this. We will, I replied, just not tonight. Sarah. I ended the call. Not out of anger. Not out of spite. But because some conversations needed more than a phone line. And more than a moment like this. I stepped out of the car and looked up at the building again. Inside, everything was quiet. Controlled. Predictable. Nothing like the room I'd left earlier. Nothing like the one I'd be walking back into soon enough. Behind me, miles away, my family was still standing in front of that screen. Still watching. Still trying to reconcile the version of me they thought they knew with the one they'd just been shown. And for the first time in years, they didn't have an answer. I didn't sleep much. Not because of the mission we'd contained. The breach stabilized the network and set protocols for follow-up. That part of my mind knew how to rest even after high-pressure decisions. What didn't rest was everything else. The silence after I ended the call. My father's voice uncertain, stripped of certainty for the first time I could remember. The way he asked how long, instead of why. That question stayed with me longer than it should have. Because it meant something had shifted. And shifts like that don't happen easily. The next morning my phone buzzed before I even made it to the kitchen. I didn't need to check. I already knew. I poured coffee anyway. Let the routine ground me. Let the familiar movements give me something steady before I stepped back into everything waiting on the other side of that screen. When I finally picked it up, the messages had multiplied. More calls, more texts. But one stood out. We're downstairs. I froze for half a second. Then set the phone down. Took a breath. Picked it up again. Who is we, I typed. The reply came almost instantly. All of us. Of course. I closed my eyes briefly, then grabbed my keys and headed for the door. They were exactly where I expected them to be. Standing in the lobby just past the glass doors. My father in front, the rest of the family behind him, quieter than I'd ever seen them. No overlapping conversations, no easy laughter. Just waiting. The doorman gave me a look as I stepped out of the elevator. Not curious, not surprised. Just aware. Doctor, he started, then stopped himself. I shook my head slightly. Sarah is fine. He nodded. I walked toward them. My father straightened as I approached, instinctively slipping back into that posture I knew so well, shoulders squared, chin slightly lifted. but there was something missing. The certainty. Sarah, he said. No edge. No authority. Just my name. I stopped a few feet in front of him. No one else spoke. For a moment it felt like the entire room was holding its breath. I didn't expect all of you, I said. My voice was calm, neutral. Controlled. We didn't know how else to. Aunt Lisa started, then stopped. My father lifted a hand slightly, not to silence her, but to gather himself. We needed to see you, he said. I studied his face. Lines I hadn't noticed before seemed deeper now, not from age, but from something else, something heavier. Okay, I said. That was all. Not an invitation. Not a rejection. Just acknowledgement. We moved upstairs in silence. They filled my living room the same way they had filled the house the night before, but everything felt different. No one touched anything. No one commented on the space. No one tried to make small talk. They just stood there, waiting. I set my keys down on the table and turned to face them. Before anyone says anything, I said, I need to be clear about something. My father nodded slowly. You don't need to be proud of what I do, I continued. That's not what this is about. A flicker of something crossed his face. You needed me to be something you understood, I said, and when I wasn't, you filled in the blanks. No one interrupted. No one disagreed. Because they couldn't. I tried to explain, I went on, more than once. My father's gaze dropped just slightly. But every time I started, I said, you already had an answer. I let the words settle. Didn't rush to fill the space after them. Didn't soften them. They didn't need to be softened. Sarah, he said quietly. I looked at him. Really looked. At the man who had taught me discipline, strength, control. And somehow never realized I had learned those lessons too well. I didn't need you to be proud of me when you saw me on that screen, I said. My voice didn't rise. Didn't break. I needed you to respect me when you thought I was nothing. The room went still. Not the kind of stillness from shock. The kind that comes when something lands exactly where it's supposed to. My father swallowed. I never thought you were nothing, he said. I held his gaze. You didn't have to say it, I replied. That was enough. Because it was true. For a moment he didn't know how to respond. And that more than anything told me everything I needed to know. I was wrong, he said finally. The words came out slower than I expected, heavier. I thought I understood what mattered, he continued. I thought, if you weren't out there, if you weren't... He stopped searching for the right words. Visible, I offered. He nodded. Then it didn't count, he finished. Silence. I built my life around a certain idea of what service looks like, he said. And I expected you to fit into it. You didn't ask if I already did, I said. He closed his eyes for a second. No, he admitted, I didn't. Behind him, the rest of the family shifted subtle movements, quiet acknowledgments of something they were only now starting to understand. I can't change what I said, he went on, or how long I believed it. No, I agreed. But I can change what I do now, he added. I studied him. There was no performance in his voice. No attempt to reclaim authority. Just effort. Real effort. I'm not asking you to forget it, he said. Or to pretend it didn't happen. Good. Because I wouldn't. I'm asking for the chance to do better. The words hung there. Not perfect. Not polished. But honest. I let out a slow breath. I'm not ready to act like everything's fine, I said. I don't expect you to, he replied. That mattered. More than an apology. More than a promise. Understanding what not to expect. I have work, I said after a moment. A team that depends on me. Decisions that don't wait for things like this to settle. I know, he said. And for the first time, it sounded like he actually did. I'm willing to talk, I added. Just not all at once. And not like this. He nodded. Whenever you're ready. I glanced around the room. At the people who had filled in the blanks. Who had nodded along. Who had never asked. I mean that for all of you, I said. No one argued. One by one they started to move quiet apologies, small nods, the kind of gestures that don't fix anything, but at least don't make it worse. When they reached the door, my father paused. Turned back. For what it's worth, he said, I saw you on that screen. I waited. He took a breath. You looked exactly like someone I would have followed. The words landed differently than the others. Not because they erased anything, but because they came from a place I understood. I nodded once. "That's enough for now," I said. He accepted that. And then they were gone. Later that day, I was back at the base. Same command center. Same screens. Same rhythm. Nothing had changed. And everything had. As I stepped into the room, conversations adjusted, not stopped, not disrupted, just aligned. Ma'am Harris said, handing me the updated report. "Let's go over it," I replied. Because that's what mattered. Not the screen. Not the headlines. Not the moment in that living room. This. The work. The responsibility. The quiet decisions that never made the news. That never needed to. That night my phone buzzed again. A message from my father. "Proud of you." I stared at it for a long moment. Then typed back. "Just respect me." 3 dots appeared. Paused. Then, "I do." I set the phone down. And for the first time in a long time, that felt enough. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been misunderstood, underestimated, or placed into a role you didn't choose, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from? What would you have done in my place? Leave a comment below and share your story. And if you want more stories like this, real, grounded, and honest, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. We're just getting started. I came home to a lock that didn't recognize me. Not a broken one, not a stuck one, just replaced. Clean, precise, intentional. My key slid in halfway and stopped like it knew it didn't belong anymore. That was the first moment something inside me went still. The second was the message. It came through while I was still standing on the porch with my duffel bag at my feet. This house doesn't have a place for you anymore. No explanation, no call, no warning. Just that. I didn't knock. I didn't call back. I didn't ask why. Because somewhere under the shock, under the quiet, there was something colder settling into place. Recognition. I had been gone for 12 days. Not overseas, not this time. A joint training rotation in Colorado high-altitude cold mornings. The kind of schedule that resets your body whether you want it or not. I flew back into Atlanta late Sunday night, rented a car, and drove the 45 minutes out to the house I had grown up in. The same house my father had lived in for 38 years. The same house I had been paying part of the mortgage on for the last 4. It was just after midnight when I pulled into the driveway. The porch light was off. The street was quiet in that particular way suburban neighborhoods get after 11 still but not empty. Someone's TV murmuring through a wall, a dog barking 2 houses down and then stopping. I remember thinking briefly that it was later than I'd told him I'd be home, that maybe he'd gone to bed. I remember reaching into my pocket for the key and feeling something like relief. Not comfort exactly, more like completion. A return point. The key didn't turn. At first I thought it was the angle. I adjusted, tried again slower this time. The metal caught halfway in and refused to go further. I pulled it out, looked at it under the porch light, and then tried the deadbolt. Same result. No resistance from the door. Just incompatibility. I stood there for maybe 10 seconds before my phone buzzed. His name came up the way it always had. No nickname, just Dad. I opened the message and read it once, then again. This house doesn't have a place for you anymore. There was a period at the end. That was the detail that registered. Not the content, the punctuation. It was final in a way that felt rehearsed. I didn't type anything back. I set my phone face down on the top of my duffel bag and looked at the door. The paint was the same off-white it had been since I was in high school. There was a small scratch near the handle from when I'd tried to carry too many grocery bags in at once and clipped the edge. The window to the left was dark, no movement inside, no sound. He was home. I knew that without checking. My father had a way of occupying a space that was detectable even when he was silent. The thermostat would be set 2 degrees lower than necessary. The hallway light would be off, but the kitchen light on. There would be a glass in the sink, rinsed but not washed. None of that mattered anymore. I picked up my phone, turned it over, and read the message one more time. Then I unlocked it, opened my contacts, and hovered over his name. My thumb didn't move. There are moments in your life when you decide who you are without saying it out loud. This was one of them. I didn't call. I picked up my bag, walked back to the car, and put it in the trunk. I sat in the driver's seat for a few seconds with the engine off, hands on the wheel, looking at the house through the windshield. It looked exactly the same. That was the part that would have made someone else doubt themselves. The sameness. I started the car and backed out of the driveway. The hotel I chose was off the highway, 15 minutes closer to the city. Clean, functional, anonymous. The kind of place that doesn't ask questions as long as your card clears. The clerk at the front desk didn't look up when I signed. I took the key, went to the room, set my bag down on the chair by the door, and stood there for a moment in the quiet. I didn't cry. That's not how this worked. I took off my jacket, hung it over the back of the chair, and walked to the window. It faced the parking lot. Sodium lights, rows of cars, a vending machine glowing blue in the corner. I checked my phone again. No new messages. Then I did something that at the time felt like instinct, and later revealed itself as training. I opened my notes app. I created a new entry. I titled it Log. Entry 1. Sunday, 12:47 a.m. Returned home. Front door lock replaced. Key incompatible. Received text from father. This house doesn't have a place for you anymore. No prior notice. I read it once, corrected the timestamp, and locked the note with a separate password. I set the phone down on the desk and sat on the edge of the bed. To understand why I did that, you need to understand something about me that most people don't know unless they've worked with me directly. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 34 years old. I'm a captain in the United States Army assigned to military intelligence. Before that, I spent 6 years in a unit where observation wasn't just encouraged, it was required. Patterns, inconsistencies, anomalies. You learn to see them before they're explained. You learn to trust the part of your brain that notices before the part that rationalizes. And for the last 11 months, there had been things I had noticed. Small things. Isolated at first. The way my father had started asking more questions about my finances. Not in a direct way. Framed as concern. You're saving right. You've got a plan for all that, don't you? The way he had asked about my mother's estate after the final paperwork came through in February. Not how I was handling it, how it was structured. How liquid is it, he'd said once over dinner as if he were asking about the weather. I had answered generally. He had nodded, then asked again, slightly differently. At the time I filed it under curiosity. Then there were the suggestions. Casual, repeated, always framed as advice. You should consolidate that. Too many accounts is messy. Tax-wise, it might make more sense if it's under one structure. We could talk to someone together, make sure it's protected. That word had started appearing more often. I had not agreed, I had not refused, I had deferred. Then there was the paperwork. 3 weeks before I left for Colorado, he had left a folder on the kitchen table, not handed it to me, left it. Inside were printed documents, forms for account access, beneficiary updates, a draft of something labeled Family Financial Coordination. The language was vague in the way that legal language is when it's designed to be interpreted broadly. He had said, just take a look, no rush. I had taken the folder to my room, read every page, and then placed it back on the table exactly where he had left it. We did not discuss it again, until the night before I left. Have you had a chance to think about those forms, he asked, standing at the sink, rinsing a glass that didn't need rinsing. I've read them, I said. And I'm not comfortable signing anything that gives shared access. He had turned, then slowly, glass still in his hand. Shared access, he repeated like the phrase itself was the problem. That's what it is. It's coordination, he said. It's making sure everything is handled correctly, in case something happens. Nothing is going to happen. He had smiled at that, not kindly, not unkindly, just with a kind of patience that suggested I was missing something obvious. That's what people always think, he said. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The conversation had already told me what I needed to know. I left for Colorado the next morning. And now I was sitting in a hotel room with a new lock on my father's door and a message that read like a conclusion. I stood up, walked to the desk, and opened my laptop. The Wi-Fi connected automatically. I logged into my primary bank account. The balance was unchanged. No unauthorized transactions, no alerts. I checked the secondary account. Same. Then the investment account. Stable. Then I opened the file my attorney had sent me 6 weeks earlier. The trust documents. My mother's estate finalized after a year of probate had transferred to me in late February, $1.3 million after taxes and fees. I had done what I was trained to do. I had structured it, quietly, completely. I had worked with an estate attorney in Buckhead, Laura Whitaker, who specialized in asset protection. We had established a revocable trust, named it something deliberately unremarkable, and transferred every dollar into it. I had told no one. Not my father, not extended family, no one outside the attorney and the bank. At the time I told myself it was about privacy. Sitting there in that hotel room, I understood it had been about something else. Preparation. I opened the transaction history again, slower this time. Dates, amounts, transfers. Everything in order. Everything exactly where it should be. Then I opened a new note. Entry 2. Sunday, 1:32 a.m. No unauthorized transactions detected across primary accounts. Trust fully funded and intact. Father aware of inheritance amount but not structure. I saved it, locked it, and leaned back in the chair. There's a point in every situation like this where you decide whether you're going to react or whether you're going to understand. I had reacted before, in smaller ways, in conversations that went nowhere, in questions that were answered with other questions. This was not that point. This was the point where I stopped thinking like a daughter and started thinking like an officer. The first thing I did the next morning was not call him. That's the part most people get wrong when they hear a story like this. They assume there's a moment where the daughter demands an explanation, where the father defends himself, where something loud and emotional fills the space between two people who are supposed to understand each other. That didn't happen. Not because I didn't feel it, but because I had already learned over the last year that asking the wrong person the right question doesn't get you an answer. It gets you a performance. I wasn't interested in a performance. I was interested in a pattern. I woke up at 6:10 a.m., the same time I would have on base. The room was still dark, the parking lot outside washed in that dull blue light that comes just before sunrise. I made coffee using the in-room machine, sat at the small desk, and opened my phone. There were 3 new messages from him, all sent between 2 o'clock and 5:30 a.m. Call me. We need to talk about last night. This isn't how we handle things. I read them in order, then again paying attention to what wasn't there. No apology, no explanation, no acknowledgement of what he had done, changing the lock, sending that message. Just an assumption that I would call, that I would step back into a conversation on terms he was setting. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my note. Entry 3, Monday 6:18 a.m. received 3 follow-up messages. Tone directive, no acknowledgement of prior action, no explanation offered. I set the phone down and let the coffee sit untouched for a few minutes while I replayed the last 12 months in my head. Not emotionally, structurally, like a report. There had been a shift sometime in late spring of the previous year. Before that, my father's interest in my finances had been casual, almost abstract. After that, it became focused. He started asking about timing, when funds would be released, whether everything had cleared, whether I had done anything with the money yet. At first, I answered in general terms. It's being handled. I'm working with an attorney. Everything's in order. He would nod, ask a follow-up, then let it go. But the questions kept returning, slightly reframed each time, like he was trying to find the version that would get a different answer. Then came the language shift. We should look at this together. It might make sense for us to structure it differently. You don't want to be managing something like that alone. That last one had stayed with me. You don't want to be managing something like that alone. I remember looking at him across the kitchen table and thinking, not for the first time, that he wasn't talking about support. He was talking about access. I hadn't confronted him then. I had filed it. The thing about patterns is that they don't announce themselves. They accumulate. A comment here, a suggestion there, a piece of paper left on a table, a conversation that feels slightly off in a way you can't quite articulate in the moment but recognize later as intentional. The folder had been the clearest example. I got up, crossed the room, and pulled my duffel bag open. Inside, between folded uniforms and a paperback I hadn't touched during the rotation, was a thin manila envelope. I had taken it with me the night before without thinking about it. Now I set it on the desk and opened it again. The documents were exactly as I remembered. Authorization forms, draft agreements, a notarization page with a blank line where my signature would go. The language was broad enough to be interpreted in multiple ways, but the effect was clear, shared control. Not advisory, not oversight. Control. I flipped to the last page and read the header again. Family Financial Coordination Agreement. There was no attorney listed, no firm name, just a generic template that could have been downloaded from any number of sites and modified. I took a picture of each page one by one, making sure the text was clear. Then I placed them back in the envelope, sealed it, and slid it into the inside pocket of my bag. Entry 4. Monday, 6:47 a.m. Reviewed Family Financial Coordination Agreement. Documents indicate intent for shared financial control. No legal representation listed. Photographed all pages. I closed the note and opened my email. There was a message from a sender I recognized but hadn't seen in years. Subject: quick question. The name was Daniel Hargrove. He had been one of my father's business contacts when I was in my 20s, real estate small development deals, the kind of work that looks stable from the outside and fluctuates constantly underneath. I opened it. Rachel, hope you're well. I've been trying to reach your father about a payment that was due last week. He mentioned you might be helping coordinate some of the finances now. Can you have him give me a call? Appreciate it. I read it twice. Then I checked the timestamp, sent the previous afternoon, while I was still in transit. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new note. Entry 5. Monday, 7:02 a.m. Email from Daniel Hargrove referencing missed payment. Indicates potential financial strain or mismanagement. Father may be presenting shared financial authority externally. That was new. Up until that point, everything had been internal. Conversations, suggestions, documents left on tables. This was the first indication that he might be positioning me externally as part of his financial structure. Not just asking for access, implying he already had it. I leaned back in the chair and let that settle. If he was telling other people that I was involved, that meant one of two things. Either he expected me to comply eventually, or he was already acting as if I had. Neither of those options worked for me. I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment, listening to the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of a truck passing on the highway. The room felt smaller now, not because it was, but because the situation had shifted from personal to operational. This wasn't about a father and a daughter disagreeing. This was about someone trying to move pieces into place. And I needed to understand what those pieces were. I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and left the room. The morning air outside was cool, carrying that faint scent of asphalt and dew. I got into the car and drove toward the house, not to go in, but to observe. The street looked the same as it always had. Mailboxes, aligned lawns, cut short a couple walking their dog 2 houses down. I parked across the street far enough that I wasn't directly in front of the house and watched. The front door opened at 7:38 a.m. My father stepped out dressed in the same way he always dressed, button-down shirt slacks, a jacket, even when the weather didn't call for it. He locked the door behind him with a key I didn't recognize, turned and walked to his car without looking up. He didn't see me. I noted the time, the sequence, the lack of hesitation. This wasn't new to him. The lock change had not been a reaction to something that happened last night. It had been planned. Entry 6. Monday, 7:42 a.m. Observed father leaving residence. New key used. Behavior consistent with premeditated action. No visible distress. I stayed there for another 10 minutes, watching the house, the windows, the stillness. Nothing moved. No one came or went. Then I drove away. By the time I got back to the hotel, my phone had another 6 missed calls and 4 new messages. Rachel, pick up the phone. This is getting out of hand. You don't just disappear like this. We need to resolve this today. The tone had shifted, less directive, more urgent. Still no acknowledgement of what he had done, still no explanation. I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I hadn't needed in a while. Laura Whitaker. I hit call. She answered on the second ring. Rachel. Good morning, I said. I need to understand something about the trust. There was a pause, the kind that tells you the person on the other end has already shifted into a different mode of thinking. What's going on? I gave her the outline, not the emotion, not the interpretation, just the facts, the lock, the message, the documents, the email from Hargrove. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 3 questions. Has anyone else had access to your accounts? Number. Have you signed anything granting access or authority? Number. Has your father ever been listed as a beneficiary or trustee? Number. There was another pause. Then, from a legal standpoint, she said he has no access, no claim, and no authority to represent you in any financial capacity. That includes external communication, I asked. That includes everything. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. What about the trust itself? It's fully funded and independently managed. You're the grantor and the beneficiary. There is no pathway for him to access those funds without your explicit consent. Even if he's presenting himself as involved. That's misrepresentation, she said, her tone tightening slightly, and it's something we can address if necessary. I looked at the phone, then back at the desk. Okay, I said. Then I need to make sure there's nothing left that can be touched. We can review everything, she said, but based on what you're telling me, you've already done the most important thing. I ended the call 10 minutes later with a list of additional steps. Account alerts, secondary authentication, documentation. Then I sat down, opened my laptop, and began implementing them one by one. By noon, every account was locked down in a way that would require my direct authorization for any change, any transfer, any access. Notifications were set, backups were created. Copies of all relevant documents were stored in 2 separate secure locations. I documented each step. Entry 7, Monday 12:14 p.m., completed security review of all financial accounts, enabled multi-factor authentication, established real-time alerts, secured copies of all relevant documents. When I finished, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes for a moment. The situation had not resolved, but it had changed. Because whatever he had been planning, whatever he had been positioning himself to do now, existed in a system that no longer included him. And systems once established correctly don't respond to pressure. They respond to rules. I opened my eyes, picked up my phone, and looked at the latest message. Rachel, this is your father. Call me now. I read it once. Then I locked the screen, set the phone down, and let the silence hold. Because for the first time since I had stood on that porch, key in hand, something was no longer uncertain. He wasn't reacting. He was adjusting. And that meant he had already realized something had moved out of his reach. By Tuesday morning, the calls had stopped. That was the first signal that something had shifted. People who believe they are in control don't stop calling when they don't get an answer. They escalate. They change tone, increase pressure, bring in other voices. Silence, on the other hand, suggests recalculation. It means the person on the other side has realized that the approach they were using is no longer effective. I woke up at the same time as the day before, made coffee, and checked my phone. No new messages from him, no missed calls. Just the residual notifications from the previous day, stacked and quiet. I didn't feel relief, I felt confirmation. Entry 8, Tuesday 6:12 a.m., no contact from father since 9:48 p.m. previous night. Behavior shift from escalation to silence. Indicates reassessment. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was check the alerts I had set up the day before. No login attempts, no unusual activity. The accounts were stable contained. Then I opened my email. There were 2 new messages. The first was from Laura, forwarding a summary of the additional security measures we had discussed. The second was from an unfamiliar address with a subject line that made me stop. Subject authorization confirmation. I opened it. Ms. Carter, we are following up on a request received regarding account access verification. Please confirm whether you have authorized Mr. Thomas Carter to act on your behalf in relation to the Whitaker Trust structure. If not, please advise immediately. I read it twice slower the second time. Then I checked the sender. A regional bank, one I recognized as having a relationship with my father's business, not with me. I didn't feel surprised. That part had already settled the night before. Entry 9, Tuesday, 6:24 a.m. received inquiry from third-party institution regarding unauthorized representation. Father attempting to establish access externally. I picked up the phone and called Laura. She answered immediately. I was about to call you. I just got an email, I said. Authorization confirmation. He's reaching out to institutions. I saw it, she said. They copied me because your trust is flagged under my firm. I've already responded. There is no authorization. We've documented it. Is that enough? It's the first step, she said, but it tells us something important. That he's moving faster, I said. That he's moving without you, she corrected. And that means whatever he's trying to do, he's under pressure. I leaned back in the chair, letting that settle. Pressure changes behavior. It accelerates decisions. It exposes intent. What kind of pressure? I asked. There was a brief pause. Financial, most likely. Based on the email you mentioned yesterday and this attempt today, he's trying to access liquidity. I thought about Hargrove's message, the missed payment, the assumption that I was helping coordinate. He's already told people I'm involved, I said. Yes, she said, and now he's trying to make that true. I ended the call with a clear understanding of what the next phase looked like. This was no longer about what he had done. It was about what he was trying to do next. At 9:15 a.m., I drove back to the neighborhood. Not to confront him, not to knock on the door. To observe again. The house looked the same porch, the same windows, the same carefully maintained front yard. There was something almost deliberate about the normalcy of it, as if the external appearance was part of the structure he relied on. I parked in the same spot as the day before and waited. At 9:32, a car I didn't recognize pulled into the driveway. A man in his late 40s stepped out carrying a folder. He knocked once, then again. The door opened almost immediately. My father stepped aside, let him in, and closed the door. No hesitation, no surprise. Scheduled. Entry 10. Tuesday, 9:35 a.m. Observed meeting at residence. Unknown male, approximately 45 to 50, carrying documents. Entry granted without delay. Indicates prearranged appointment. I watched the house for another 20 minutes. No one came out, no visible movement. Then I drove away. Back at the hotel, I laid out everything I had. The notes, the messages, the email from the bank, the photograph of the documents he had left on the table weeks earlier, the memory of every conversation that had felt slightly off at the time, and now aligned into something coherent. Patterns don't just reveal what has happened, they suggest what will happen next. He had attempted to introduce shared control through documents, increased frequency and specificity of financial questions, positioned me externally as involved in his finances, changed the lock, removing my access to the house, attempted to establish authority with third-party institutions. Each action on its own could be explained. Together they formed a structure. I opened a new page in my notebook. Objective access funds. Method establish perceived authority to convert to actual authority to execute transfer. Obstacle lack of legal authorization. Adjustment create urgency to pressure response to exploit compliance. I sat there for a moment looking at the sequence. Then I wrote the next line. Countermeasure remove all possible pathways. At 11 a.m. I met Laura in her office. She was exactly as I remembered, precise, controlled, with a desk that held only what was necessary. No clutter, no distractions. I laid everything out in front of her. The notes, the email, the observed meeting, the documents he had prepared. She reviewed them in silence, occasionally making a small notation on a legal pad. When she finished, she looked up at me. He's building a case, she said. For what? For access, she said. Not legally, not yet. But procedurally, he's trying to create enough of a narrative that someone somewhere might accept it without verifying. I nodded. That matched what I had been seeing. Can he? Not with your current structure, she said. But that doesn't mean he won't try, and every attempt creates risk if it's not addressed. What's the next step? She tapped the edge of the documents lightly. We formalize your position. The process took 2 hours. Affidavits. Statements. Formal notices to institutions clarifying that no third party had authority to act on my behalf. Additional restrictions placed on the trust, not because they were strictly necessary, but because they created layers that required direct verification. Each step was documented. Each document was signed, notarized, filed. At the end, she slid a copy of the final notice across the desk. This is the line, she said. Everything on your side is now explicit. If he continues, it moves from misunderstanding to misrepresentation. I looked at the paper, then back at her. And if it's already misrepresentation, then we have documentation, she said. And documentation is what matters. I left the office at 1:27 p.m. and sat in my car for a few minutes before starting the engine. There's a moment in operations where preparation shifts into execution. It's not marked by a single action. It's a series of small, precise steps that, taken together, create a position that can't easily be undone. That's where I was. I drove back to the hotel, went to the room and set my phone on the desk. At 2:03 p.m. it rang. His name. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times. Then I answered. "Rachel," he said, his voice controlled in a way that told me he was working to keep it that way. "We need to talk." "I'm listening," I said. A brief pause. He wasn't expecting that. "This situation has gotten out of hand," he said. "You leaving, not answering your phone, this isn't how we handle things." I didn't respond. "We have responsibilities," he continued. "There are financial matters that need to be addressed, and your absence is creating complications." "Which financial matters?" I asked. Another pause, slightly longer this time. "Things that concern the family," he said. "The family," I repeated, "or you." The silence on the other end was different now. Not recalculation, recognition. "Rachel," he said, his tone shifting, "this isn't the time to be difficult." "I'm not being difficult," I said. "I'm being clear." "Clear about what?" "That I haven't authorized you to act on my behalf," I said. "With anyone." His breath caught just slightly, enough to register. "That's not what this is about," he said quickly. "This is about coordination, about making sure everything is handled properly." "I've already handled it," I said. "What does that mean?" "It means there's nothing for you to coordinate." The silence stretched. "Rachel," he said finally. And now there was something else in his voice, something closer to urgency than control. "You don't understand the situation." "I understand it," I said, "better than you think." Another pause. "Then you'll come by the house," he said. "We can sit down and go through everything." I looked at the wall in front of me, at the neutral paint, the framed print that had no meaning beyond decoration. "No," I said. "No." "You changed the locks," I said. "You made your position clear." That was, he started, then stopped. That was a mistake. I let that sit between us. "What kind of mistake?" I asked. No answer. "Rachel," he said, and now the urgency was no longer contained. "We need to fix this. There are obligations." "Yours?" I said. The line went quiet. Then softly, almost carefully, he said, "You don't know what you're talking about." I ended the call. I set the phone down and opened my notes. Entry 11, Tuesday 2:11 p.m. Direct call. Father attempted to reframe situation as family obligation. Avoided specifics. Acknowledged lock change as mistake without explanation. Indicators of financial pressure increasing. I closed the note and leaned back in the chair. The structure was complete now. Not just in my understanding, in reality. Because whatever he had been trying to build, whatever narrative he had been positioning, it no longer had a path forward. And he knew it. Which meant the next move wouldn't be controlled. It would be reactive. And reactive moves are where people make mistakes. The mistake came on Wednesday. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind that announces itself with raised voices or sudden revelations. It came quietly, the way most meaningful errors do, embedded in something that looked routine on the surface and careless underneath. At 8:17 a.m., I received a notification from one of the alert systems Laura had recommended. Unusual login attempt. The location was local, same county. The device was unrecognized. The attempt had been blocked automatically because of the new authentication layers, but the record was there, time-stamped, logged, undeniable. I opened the details and read through them once, then again. Entry 12. Wednesday, 8:19 a.m. Unauthorized login attempt flagged. Location local, device unrecognized, access denied due to MFA, indicates direct attempt to enter account. I sat there with the phone in my hand, feeling something settle into place that hadn't fully resolved until that moment. He had moved from positioning to action. That mattered. Because intention can be explained, action requires consequence. I forwarded the alert to Laura with a single-line document this. Her reply came 3 minutes later. Already done. Do not engage directly. Let the system hold. Let the system hold. That was the discipline. Not reacting to every movement. Not stepping in emotionally when the structure was already doing the work it was designed to do. I set the phone down, finished my coffee, and went through the rest of the morning, the same way I would have on any other day, controlled, methodical, focused on what was in front of me rather than what was happening somewhere else. At 10:42 a.m., the next piece came in. A voicemail. Not from him. From someone I hadn't heard from in years. Rachel, this is Karen Lewis. I'm with First Regional Lending. Your father gave me your number. We're trying to finalize a short-term bridge on a property, and he indicated you'd be co-signing. If you could call me back today, we're on a deadline. I listened to it twice. Then I saved it. Entry 13. Wednesday, 10:45 a.m. Voicemail from lending institution. Father representing me as co-signer on loan. No authorization given. Escalation from access attempt to financial commitment. This was the shift. Up until now, he had been trying to get access to what existed. Now he was trying to extend beyond it, leveraging my name, my financial standing, to create new obligations. That was no longer just misrepresentation. That was exposure. I called Laura. She answered immediately. I saw the alert. I assume you've got something else. Voicemail, I said. Lending institution. He's telling them I'm co-signing. There was a brief pause, then the sound of a pen being set down. Send it to me, she said. I forwarded the file. 30 seconds later, she spoke again. All right, that's clear. What does that change? It clarifies intent, she said. He's not just trying to access existing assets. He's trying to leverage your financial profile to secure new ones. And that moves us into a different category, she said. We're no longer just protecting, we're documenting for potential action. I leaned back in the chair looking at the wall. What kind of action? That depends on how far he goes, she said. For now, we notify the institution directly. We put them on record that you are not involved, that any representation to the contrary is false, and that they proceed at their own risk if they ignore that. And him? We don't contact him, she said. Not yet. We let the external systems close around the behavior. By early afternoon, the notifications had gone out. Formal emails, certified notices, documentation attached. Every institution that had been contacted with my name was now aware that it had been used without authorization. Every attempt was logged, time-stamped, preserved. I added each step to the log. Entry 14. Wednesday, 1:26 p.m. Sent formal notices to third-party institutions. Clarified no authorization. Established record of misrepresentation. When I finished, I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment, letting the silence settle. This was the part that most people misunderstand. They think control comes from confrontation, from saying the right thing at the right time in a room where the other person can hear it. It doesn't. Control comes from structure, from systems that don't require your presence to function, from documentation that speaks without emotion. I didn't need to confront him, because everything he was doing was already being recorded in a way that would matter. At 4:03 p.m., my phone rang again. His name? I let it ring twice before answering. Rachel, he said, and this time the control was gone. Not entirely, but enough that the edges were visible. What are you doing? I didn't respond. I've had 3 calls today, he continued faster now. 3. Banks, lenders, people I've worked with for years, all telling me there's some issue with authorization, that you've contacted them, that you're... What is this? I clarified my position, I said. Your position, he repeated. Your position is that we handle things together. That's how this works. That's how you wanted it to work, I said. It's not how it works. There was a sharp exhale on the other end. You're making this difficult for no reason, he said. There are deals in motion, commitments. You can't just step out and expect everything to hold. They're not my commitments, I said. They're family commitments. No, I said, and kept my voice even. They're yours. The silence that followed was not confusion. It was calculation. You don't understand the consequences of this, he said, finally lower, now more controlled. You think you're protecting something, but you're actually putting all of us at risk. All of us, I repeated. Yes. Name one person besides you, I said. He didn't answer. That's what I thought I said. Rachel, I've notified every institution you contacted. I said, not raising my voice, not changing my tone. They have it in writing that you do not have authorization to represent me in any capacity. If you continue, it becomes something else. Something else, he said. Yes. Another pause. What are you implying, he asked. I'm not implying anything I said. I'm documenting. The word landed. I could hear it in the way his breathing changed just slightly. You're overreacting, he said, but the certainty was gone. No, I said, I'm responding appropriately. There was a long silence. Then, quieter, almost careful, he said, you need to come home. We need to fix this. I looked at the window at the parking lot at the same rows of cars I had seen the night before. That's not my home anymore, I said. That's ridiculous. You changed the locks, I said. You made that decision. I said that was a mistake. No, I said, it wasn't. Another silence. Then finally the question he had been avoiding since the beginning. What did you do? He asked. I let the question sit for a moment. Not because I needed time to answer. Because I wanted him to understand that the answer was not something he could influence. I made sure there was nothing left for you to reach, I said. The line went completely still. No, he said almost immediately. That's not possible. It is, I said. How he demanded. That's not something you need to know, I said. Rachel, I ended the call. I set the phone down and opened my notes. Entry 15, Wednesday, 4:12 p.m., direct confrontation. Father acknowledges external pushback, displays loss of control, requests clarification of actions taken, refused. I closed the note and leaned back in the chair. The system was holding. Every attempt he made was now meeting resistance that didn't depend on me being there to provide it. And more importantly, he knew it, which meant the next phase wouldn't be about access. It would be about urgency, because whatever pressure he was under hadn't gone away. It had just lost its solution. And when people lose the solution they've been relying on, they don't stop. They escalate. By Thursday night, the calls turned into something else. Not louder, not more aggressive, just different. They came in clusters now, 2, 3 at a time, followed by long stretches of nothing. The messages shifted from commands to requests, then from requests to explanations that weren't quite explanations. I listened to each one once saved it and filed it without responding. Rachel, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We need to clear this up. I didn't mean for things to go this far, just call me. There are deadlines here, real ones, I need your help. The language had changed, the structure underneath it hadn't. He still wasn't naming anything specific. No numbers, no obligations, no acknowledgement of the lock, the documents, the attempts to access or represent. Just a general sense of urgency framed as something shared. It wasn't shared. I woke up Friday morning at 6:05, made coffee, and sat at the desk the same way I had every day since I left the house. The routine mattered. It kept the situation contained inside a structure I could manage. Entry 16. Friday, 6:11 a.m. Continued contact attempts. Tone shift from directive to conciliatory. No specific details provided. Indicates sustained pressure without resolution. I set the phone down and opened my laptop. There was one new email. From Laura. Subject update. I opened it. Rachel. We received confirmation this morning that the lending institution declined the application your father submitted. They cited lack of authorized co-signer verification. Additionally, the regional bank has flagged his account for review based on the recent activity and discrepancies in representation. This does not require action from you at this time. Continue to document and do not engage directly. Laura. I read it once, then again. Declined. Flagged for review. That was the external system doing exactly what it was supposed to do. I added it to the log. Entry 17, Friday 6:24 a.m. lending application declined due to lack of authorization. Bank account flagged for review. External systems responding as expected. I closed the laptop and sat there for a moment, letting the implications settle. Whatever he had been trying to secure, whatever deadlines he had referenced, had now hit a wall. Not because I had confronted him, because the structure he was relying on no longer existed. At 9:12 a.m., my phone rang again. I let it ring. Then it rang again. And again. On the fourth call, I answered. "Rachel," he said, and this time there was no attempt at control, no framing, just urgency unfiltered. "I need you to listen to me." "I am," I said. "This has gone too far," he said. "You've contacted people, you've interfered with things you don't understand, and now everything is—" He stopped, took a breath, started again. "There are payments due. Contracts. If this doesn't get resolved today—" "It won't be resolved today," I said. "You don't know that." "I do," I said. Another breath, sharper this time. "Rachel, I'm asking you." "No," I said, not raising my voice, not changing my tone. "You're not asking, you're reacting." The silence on the other end stretched. "That's not fair," he said finally. "Neither was changing the locks," I said. "That was a mistake." "You've said that." "And it was," he insisted. "I was frustrated. You weren't cooperating. I needed to make a point." "A point," I repeated. "Yes. And the point was what I asked, that I don't have a place in the house I've been helping pay for." "That's not what I meant." "It's what you did," I said. Another pause. "I'm trying to fix it," he said, and now there was something else in his voice, something close to desperation. "Just come back. We'll change the locks, we'll sit down, we'll go through everything. I'll show you the numbers, the agreements." "I don't need to see them," I said. "You do," he said quickly, "because you don't understand the position we're in." "There is no we," I said. "There's you, and there's the position you put yourself in." "That's not how families work," he said. "That's how this one does," I said. The line went quiet. Then, softer, more carefully, he said, "You think this is about money." "I know it is," I said. "It's not just money," he said. "It's responsibility. It's access," I said, "and you don't have it." The words landed exactly the way I intended them to. Flat, precise, irreversible. "You're making a mistake," he said, but the certainty was gone. "No," I said. "I already corrected one." "What does that mean?" he asked. "It means there's nothing left for you to leverage," I said. Another silence. "Longer this time?" Then quietly, almost to himself, he said, "That's not possible." I let the silence hold for a few seconds. Then I spoke. "The funds are in a trust," I said, "independently managed, no shared access, no external authority, no pathway." The line went completely still. "You did what he said." "I secured my assets," I said. When he demanded. "Before you asked," I said. The exhale on the other end was sharp, almost involuntary. "No," he said. "No, that's not, you can't just, there are structures, there are ways this has to be handled." "It's already handled," I said. "You needed to consult me," he said, grasping for something that sounded like authority. "No," I said, "I didn't. I'm your father." "That's not a financial role," I said. The silence that followed was different. Not reactive. Not calculated. Empty. Because the framework he had been operating within, the assumptions, the expectations, the leverage, had just been removed in a way he couldn't adjust to. "You've put me in a very difficult position," he said finally. I leaned back in the chair, looking at the wall at the same neutral paint I had been staring at for days. "No," I said, "you did that. There are obligations." "Yours," I said. "They affect more than just me." "Then you should have thought about that before you used my name," I said. Another pause. "Rachel," he said. And now there was something else there, not control, not urgency, something closer to realization. "You don't walk away from family like this." I let the words sit between us. Then I answered. "You locked me out," I said. "I just didn't knock." The line went silent. I ended the call. I set the phone down and opened my notes. Entry 18. Friday, 9:28 a.m. Full disclosure provided. Father informed of trust structure, immediate loss of leverage, emotional shift from urgency to realization. I closed the note and sat there for a moment, letting the quiet settle. This was the part most people imagine as the climax. The confrontation, the reveal, the moment where everything is said out loud. It wasn't. Because the real shift had already happened days earlier when I moved the funds into a structure he couldn't reach. Everything since then had just been him discovering it. I checked out of the hotel that afternoon. Not because the situation was resolved, but because it didn't require me to stay in that space anymore. I drove back toward the city, found a short-term lease in a building with secure access and minimal visibility, and signed it the same day. 2 bedrooms, east-facing windows, enough space for what I needed and nothing more. The first night I stood in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and watched the light come in through the glass. There was no tension in the room, no calculation, no sense that I needed to anticipate someone else's next move, just space. And the absence of something I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. The next morning I opened my notebook. Not the log, a new one. Blank pages. No entries, no timestamps. Just space. I wrote a single line. This wasn't revenge. Then I stopped, considered it, and added the second. It was correction. If you've stayed with me this long, you already know this wasn't about a lock or a message or even the money. It was about the moment you realize that someone you trusted has been building a version of your life that doesn't include your consent, and the decision you make when you see it clearly. I want to know what you would have done in that moment. Would you have knocked on the door? Would you have called back? Or would you have walked away and let the system speak for you? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Stories like this happen more often than people admit, and there's value in understanding them not just for what they are, but for what they teach you about control boundaries and the difference between reacting and acting with intention. If this story resonated with you, subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories ahead, real ones, quiet ones, the kind that don't shout, but still change everything. Let's keep going together.